Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we have a lot of crop scouting on our agenda. Not only do we want to see how our young plants are progressing out here in the fields, we also need to evaluate the damage from another unfortunate run-in with Mother Nature. No, this time it wasn't a frost, it wasn't hail, so you can check those two off your list. It was a flood. The only thing we're missing at this point is severe wind. Hopefully we don't see any of that stuff this season. The first three were enough for me. Over 2 weeks ago, we were blessed with 4 to 5 inches of rain in about a 6 to 7 hour period over the night. For those who are unfamiliar with rainfall quantities, 4 to 5 inches of rain in that short of a time frame is an astronomical amount of moisture and rainfall for our fields. None of our drainage systems are built to handle even close to that capacity of water. Needless to say that all of our farms that had the misfortune of catching this rain were pretty much underwater. If you don't believe me, let's take a step back in time, check it out for yourselves. Just when we had thought that Mother Nature had concluded all of her generosity for the season, we had hoped that all of her philanthropy was done, and we were in fact wrong, because we received a very nice surprise overnight, and that surprise was a lot of rain. When I say a lot of rain, I mean a minimum of 2 inches on all of our farms, with areas that had up to 5 inches of rain. Although 2 inches of rain is nothing to scoff at, 5 inches of rain is literal nightmare fuel. That is a massive rainfall and something we did not need. Fortunately though, a majority of our ground here around our home farm only got that 2 to 2.5 inch rain. Some of our ground up north of town though was not as lucky. A few of those farms were subject to at least 4 to 4.5 inches of rain. So I can tell you, even before we go up there and scout it out, we are going to have to do some replanting here once it dries out and we see exactly the extent of the damage. That hailstorm a few weeks ago was more than ample amount of replanting for me, and I think we just opened a whole nother can of worms with all of this water. Like I said, all of this ground around home had a relatively low amount of rainfall. You can see where a lot of it washed through the fields, multiple channels it took. Got a low spot out there that's holding quite a bit of water that has a couple inlets draining it, and the rest of it can find its way off down grade. We are fortunate around here to have some degree of slope to prevent the water from ponding all across the farm. It picks 1 or 2 places. We can kind of drain that with tile inlets, and the rest of it got off. Up north of town, we aren't quite as fortunate. Plenty of water down here in the river bottoms. It has gone down quite a bit. That was completely submerged at one point in time. There'll probably be a bunch of dead fish out there when it dries up. Wouldn't want to be out there swimming. Most of that rain is coming from up north. Like I said, they had quite a bit more rain than we had down here to the south. It's just slowly working its way down. Probably a safe bet to say that this river bottom is also flooded. We'll sit on this old bridge that they're about to replace. Quite a bit of water there on the east side. That's not ours. We farmed there on the west. It looks like it was underwater at one point in time, but most of it's gotten away. As long as the crops don't wash away, which they usually don't, that water won't make that big of a difference. There's another one. Geez, that's a lot of water. Look at the Lake Paradise Dam. The prognosis isn't going to be quite as good when we get up here into this flat black ground. It just does not have the capacity to drain like we do down south, where there's a little bit more of terrain that's friendlier for water movement. It doesn't help though that they got an additional 2 inches to what we've got. You can already see the signs of ponding. Not a good sight to see. Ponds everywhere. We're pretty close to ground zero of this massive accumulation of rainfall, and it does not help that we're in the swamplands. This flat black dirt really has no way to drain other than tiles. You can see right there we have probably a 12-inch tile inlet, which is rather massive. Working on this pond, we farm all this corn right here, and there is a lot of water across there. And our neighbor to the north has a larger pond, so we kind of share this to drain. Now, if you think this is a lot of water, you're not wrong, but, and this is a very big but, this has been draining for over 10 hours at this point in time. It is almost noon, and this storm hit about midnight last night and laid down a lot of water. So we didn't even get to see the multiple million gallons of water that have already left these farms from the initial blow. The worst part about this is they're calling for another 1 to 3 inches tonight. There's nothing good about this storm. Another storm on top of that though may be the nail in the coffin for a lot of our corn that's underwater. We definitely have to count our blessings though. It's early May, so if we do have to replant, it's not like we're going to be that far behind. Secondly, it's not super warm, only 70 degrees, and it's not sunny. That means that our crops can afford to sit underwater for much longer. The warmer it is outside, and especially if it's sunny, the plants essentially speed up their own suffocation under the water. They don't have all those atmospheric gases that are essential to completing that process, so they die. When you get big rains like this, the best thing is for the sun to stay behind the clouds and for it not to be very warm, which means we're in decent shape today. But if we get that 1 to 3 inches of rain later on in the week, they're calling for highs in the 90 and sunshine, which, if you could read between the lines, is not good. The only major downside to these inlets, which just comes with the territory, is a lot of plant debris builds up around them as they drain. So you do have to go out there and clean them pretty frequently, once or twice a day, if you want to ensure that you're getting the most of water out as possible. Thankfully, I brought my handy dandy muck boots that have fallen apart. So we're gonna waltz out there and clean it off real quick. If you couldn't tell, my old Red Wings are no longer waterproof. That's what 5 or 6 years of work will do to them. You never know what you're gonna get when you step through these ditches. It's kind of Pandora's box. I like to gauge the level of the water with the hoe before I make any missteps. I'll have this clean in the next couple hours and I've accumulated more that's just washed on the bank. Those of you wondering how much water moves through this, I'm gonna take the drone up real quick and give you guys a better idea of how much water is still out in the fields about 10 to 12 hours after a 4 to 4.5 inch rain here in the western side of Mattoon. It's been about 4 hours. I really didn't have anything better to do than come out here and try and clean this inlet again, get a little bit more water off. The bad news is, if you can see behind me, there's another heavy rain coming across the countryside from the west to the east, and that is the additional 1 to 3 inches of rain they're calling for, starting about right now and then going through early morning. Fingers crossed that it doesn't amount to much, because we're gonna have to do a lot of replanting out here regardless of how much more rain we get. Although it does look like it's heading to the northeast, we might get lucky. It's been roughly 48 hours, give or take a little bit, since the last time we were out here checking out this field. And you can see from that drone footage, the water has gone down a tremendous amount in just that short amount of time. This entire pond on the west side of this field has pretty much drained through this inlet. You saw in the drone footage, there are a lot of individual ponds out there still working to get empty. There's really not much we can do to expedite that process. Just wait and see. I am very optimistic. All this corn is still green. It should be fine. Years ago, we did not have this big inlet here and we'd lose quite a bit of crop. Now we're probably not gonna have to replant anything here. We will have to replant a bunch of different spots out here in this field, which is unfortunate, but just part of farming. You may or may not have been able to tell in that second round of drone footage exactly how much water has been out here and how much of that has already exited the fields and gone downstream. If you didn't notice that, go back to that second clip and pay close attention to where the ground is disturbed. You can very easily tell where the water was versus where it is now. Especially in areas where there's still water standing, piled up corn stalks are usually a good indicator at where the water level peaked. Speaking of corn stalks, we're about 2 miles to the northeast of the farm we were just at. We don't have any farm ground up here, but they did have close to 5 inches of rain. And you want to talk about the power of Mother Nature. The water came through here with a vengeance. Look at all those corn stalks. That's going to be a nightmare to deal with. Might have to get a trackhoe out there and dig out the ditch because those will never dry up enough to burn. Okay, we're back in present day. I told you that it was a lot of water, and I'm sure you do believe me now. Well, now we get to have the fun of scouting all of these fields and determining what kind of action we need to take or not take in regards to the specific field and crop. It is finally getting to the point where we can really see the damage from that rain a couple weeks ago, the final stand, and quite frankly, it's the first time that we're even close enough to be able to consider getting the planter out here and replanting both corn and soybeans. Once all of that water finally got off, we went through a little bit of a warm spell, back to a cool spell, and we're starting to warm back up. So I think that as long as we don't get another shower, if we do decide to pull the trigger and bring the tractor and planter out here, we could probably do it today, or at least on this farm. We only had a handful of our farms fall into this very heavy rainfall west of Mattoon and north of Route 16. So thankfully, we're not going to have a ton of replanting to do on our main farm. We did get 3 inches down at home, but as you guys know, every inch counts, and the 4 or 5 inches was a lot bigger difference. This farm, though, was one of the unfortunate recipients of that large rainfall. This also happens to be that tract where we put in 2 brand new terraces last fall, which is why I'm out here scouting it out. You usually don't expect terraces like this to be able to survive such a large quantity of rain. They're designed to hold water for a short to medium amount of time to keep it from going downgrade and causing a big wash, which is what was here before, and this was supposed to help alleviate that. And it definitely did not wash because of these terraces, which is a good sign. The first couple of years after you install something like this, you kind of expect to not have the greatest crop. A lot of dirt work, heavy machinery, relocating topsoil results in just a poor stand in the terrace bottoms and typically a below average final yield. That's not guaranteed. It is a very real possibility though. Now, by no means are these beans perfect at all. Really, they're far from perfect. They're also far from bad though, from what I can tell. I was really expecting when I walked out here to have to replant at least the terrace bottoms. From the side, they don't look that great. However, when you look at them straight on, they're actually pretty decent. If you can row the beans, that's typically a good sign that you don't need to replant. It's this terrace's lucky day. I actually don't think there's a single spot out here on any of the embankment or any of the channel that feeds it that really needs any replanting. That spot is a little thin. We may consider replanting that. Let's go check the one to the west. All right, we are at our destination. Looks pretty good. No beans right there next to the inlet. I think it was a little wet when I planted that, and they probably just didn't come up at all. So we do have a little sliver there with no soybeans. As you can see though, it's pretty damp, so I don't know if it's even actually worth our time to come out here and try and replant that. If you're curious why it's still damp, well, you can thank our brand new terraces. I've mentioned many times when you build new terraces, it's extremely hard to account for very old, pre-existing infrastructure, like old clay tiles. That's definitely not helping dry at all. It's drying something, but not that spot. Country roads, take me home to the place I belong, West Virginia. Considering what those beans have been through over the last few weeks, I'm actually thoroughly surprised that there's such a good quality stand out there. Now, I am going to be bringing the planter up to replant a few spots with corn stalks and piles, things that just cannot really be avoided when you have a large rain like that. So I'll probably go up there and spot in those terrace bottoms. It's one of those deals where I'm up here, it's convenient. They are a little bit thin, so it doesn't hurt to thicken them out. They're actually a pretty decent walk out into the field. Had to take the Shoelace Express. Before we get too far along and make any rash decisions, I'm gonna go chat with the boss. He usually comes out here and scouts with me at the same time, so we both kind of have an idea of what's going on. but let's just say he's a little incapacitated right now. I wish I had taken some drone footage of this farm underwater. It didn't have near as much moisture here as the cornfield we looked at a few times. I'm happy with what I see there. I think you guys are going to be really shocked when you see the cornfield in what happened out there. Now, we're not going to draw any specific attention to my dad's injury after I explain this. Essentially what happened is he got out of his truck, maybe took a misstep on some uneven terrain, and partially tore his calf muscle, which is a pretty bad injury to get. They say that it is very common in old men. To be fair though, it's probably a combination of his age and a lifetime of hard labor. Regardless though, he's in a boot, kind of hobbling around. Try not to laugh. The decision has been made. Planter to the field. If I recall how to operate this. All my John Deere pals just hanging out here in the barn. Rat packed in. We do have a few of those enlist beans that we replanted from the hail in here. We are going to an enlist bean, but a much shorter bean, probably a 2.9 or a 3.0 versus the 3.7 that we have in the planter now. So we're gonna dump out the remainder. I don't think it's much. Clear of everything. This looks like a pretty good spot to dump the planter. Okay, maybe a little bit farther. There's Dad in his boot. As I suspected, there was very few left in there. We've got the doors open, which has the seed fan running, blowing it straight out of the tank. Normally we wouldn't clean it out this way, but this is probably the quickest way to do this. Sitting inside, enjoying the nice climate control. 30 minutes to hobble over to the other side to dump it out. I would go help him, but by the time I get out there, he usually yells at me to go do something in the tractor, so I've learned just kind of stay here. But now the tractor just long enough for the air to leak off in the seat. Gotta be just right for the ride. It's too much. Much better. We're off to save the world. Or at least the world of that field of soybeans, which is really not that important in the scheme of things. But that's what we're going to do. It's been well over 3 weeks since the last time I was in the tractor. I was partially worried that I wasn't going to remember how to drive it. Then I realized that this is like riding a bike to someone who's farmed their whole life. Crops look good around here. The farm that we're headed to is about a half mile to the north that way, and the beans we need are right there at our Pioneer dealers. So we're going to make a quick stop here, throw a couple bags on the planter. It's a small replanting project, won't take very many. As they say, keep your friends close and your Pioneer salesmen closer. I think that's how that goes. Here's our beans.
There's one of that ramp, I can't see.
You got plenty of room. Whoa. Alright, made quick work out of that with Wes's help. We loaded 5 bags total, so 2.5 on each side, 2 extra on the platform. They are 2.8 T14E Pioneer enlist beans. We went with the late group 2 maturity because the first time we planted this, it was a 3.1 soybean, so slightly longer maturity. They should reach harvesting condition at about the same time. We're gonna hop the ditch right here and start planting. Check out that nice new section of hose right there. Doesn't match the rest of the planter because it's not coated in pounds of dirt. Get these row units primed and start replanting. Wrap around the terrace. Feeling lucky today. Just like riding a bike. Relatively firm here. My one problem with replanting is that I can be rather nitpicky or a perfectionist about details, and I hate planting somewhere where I'm just not planting where I drove. So I do my best to do like 3 or 4 or 100-point turns to back the planter around in a way that I can plant it. That's a little soft. Jeez. I think this terrace still has some settling to do. Just getting out to check on the planter. I didn't hit an inlet or anything. That'd be totally unlike me. Oh, strange. Wind must have done that. I'm planning through the draw to get to the other end where we have a bunch of big piles of silt that have covered up the original beans. We need to replant them. Because there's a good stand here, I'm only putting about 80,000 plants per acre. If we get into an area that's completely barren, destitute of beans, we'll bump it up to 150 to 160, get them growing a little faster. As you can see though, the beans look pretty good for how much water went through here. Here comes the piles of silt I was talking about. We'll go to 160,000. Hopefully it's not wet underneath. Kind of Pandora's box. You never know what it's going to be like underneath this. Could be solid, could be mud. Oh, nice and powdery. Right there is where the tiles from those two terraces drain to. Just got to replant this in and I'm done. For the life of me, I can't get this little strip in here to plant. I backed up multiple times, put the planter down, and it hasn't planted through here. For no reason at all. Maybe the planter knows something I don't, but I'm gonna have to figure out what and why this is happening. When in doubt, cycle of power. Spin the disc a few times. There are seeds coming out, so you can verify that there are seeds. Section control is off. I'm gonna turn it on. I'm gonna turn it off again. So all rows should be green. They are. Let's give it a shot. Nothing. What? I don't understand why it's not planting. Well, if it wasn't software, we better go check the hardware. All that looks fine. That looks fine too. My sensor, good. Appears to be fine. I really have no idea what's going on. I had to make a phone call to someone who knows a little bit more at Alliance Tractor. He said to check after a few different things. We tried the wheel sensor, and when I start moving, it's supposed to go to active. And you see, I'm registering speed, but it's not turning active. And he said maybe it's unplugged. So we're gonna check that. Well, this is the sensor right here. We actually looked at it a second ago before we got in the tractor. It appears to be plugged in. At this point, we pretty much just narrowed the problem down to the wheel sensor being bad. So we gotta make a parts run to John Deere. An hour later, and Chris, Jeff, and I have successfully replaced the sensor. I'm not 100% positive that that's what's wrong, but you cannot argue that it isn't a little bit beat up. We're gonna test it out and see if that's what it was. So what we're looking for here is on this diagnostics page, which is not that one. We want VRD data. And we're looking for, when I put that in drive, for this to turn to active. Nothing. It's a terrible feeling when you spend all this time working on something, thinking, okay, this is a solution, and it's not, in fact, the solution. It's just life sometimes. We're going to give it one more shot, and if not, we're folding it up, taking it home. All the John Deere techs are gone for the day, because it's 5 o'clock. Not that that's their fault. Nothing. The worst part about this is that they're calling for a pretty good chance of rain tonight. So I can't really leave it here. Gotta take her home. Figure it out sometime in the future. Back to the promised land with unfulfilled dreams and broken hearts. Planter, why'd you have to let me down? I was almost certain that taking this off was gonna fix it. It was all sorts of mangled. You can see the new one in there is in much better undisturbed shape. That didn't do it though. My chariot awaits. We're about to be pulling up on the farm that I showed all the drone footage of earlier on in the video, which probably had 30 to 40 acres underwater. It's only an 80-acre field, so having 50%, give or take a little bit, of the acres underwater, it's a pretty big deal. Before we pull up, I want you guys to take your guesses as to how many acres out here are going to need replanted. 10, 20, 30, 40? Drop your guesses in the comments. There's no denying that there wasn't an ungodly amount of water out here. How much damage did it actually do though? All right, everyone, get those guesses in. I want to see what you think we're dealing with here. Give you a few more seconds. Okay, let's take a look. Here we are at that inlet that we cleaned multiple times over the 3 to 4 days that this farm was underwater. If you're eating or drinking right now, make sure you swallow or spit out, because I do not want you to choke. Here is the grand reveal of all of our crops that died. Look at that. There's nothing dead right there. All right, this survived, not necessarily unscathed. There is some chlorosis or yellowing in the leaves just from those wet feet. Corn does not like that. But we also had this draining it. So let's walk out farther in the field. Maybe there's a little bit more damage in the other swampy areas. Regardless of what happened out here, there is one major downside to getting that much rain, and that's that your residual herbicides usually don't hold that well. And we're starting to have a lot of water hemp coming through. The Acuron just did not like all that moisture. Either washed down or washed away, but it's not holding the water hemp back. We're about to crest the hill into the first pond out here where we have an inlet. We'll see how it looks. All the corn on the hill looks tremendous. Thick, starting to grow out in the rows. What are we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. V5, almost V6 corn, and a lot more leaves coming out. And it's grabbed a hold of its nitrogen. Nice, lush and green. Okay, let's take a look at it. Oh, all this damaged corn. Oh, wait a minute. It's all there. Except for these stalks from where the water level was. Nothing you can really do about that, but that's very minor, not worth replanting. But look at all that corn out there. There's evidence of Bigfoot. Just kidding, that's from my dad coming out here to clean his inlets. This specific pond and inlet was so deep that he had to break out his hip waders. And he said the water was about to his waist. It was that way for probably 2 days, and the rest of it slowly drained out over the next 2 days. So this area was underwater for 4 days, and we lost a very, very insignificant number of plants out here. The first time that Dad and I crested that hill to check on these inlets and see what we're gonna have to replant, we about had a stroke, because we were thinking, okay, maybe 10 to 15 acres out here, a lot was underwater. It would make sense that a lot of the corn died. And then we saw this, just a full stand of corn out here, except for where Dad swung it wide around the inlet. He doesn't take any chances like me. I gave it a love tap, he gives it a whole acre. He probably doesn't want to get out of the tractor. But I digress. The point is that all of our ponds that I showed you that were underwater survived some significantly non-ideal conditions. And they seem to be thriving at this point. Now, I'm sure there was a little bit of a setback. We already mentioned that we're having a lot of water hemp push up in here. We may have to come back out and spray some 2,4-D or dicamba to wipe those out. You don't like to have to do that, especially when you pay so much money for a one-pass like Acuron. It just comes with the territory with this significant of a weather event. Had it not gotten all this moisture, this corn would probably be taller than it is now. You can see that there is some leaf tissue damage. Being underwater for so long does take a toll. If that's the price we have to pay to have a stand out here and not have to replant, we'll take it. As a matter of fact, this corn may not see any kind of a yield drag. I wouldn't bet you dinner on that by any means. It is highly likely, though, that it could still hang even with the rest of the farm. Unless, of course, we get another big rain and then another big rain. The big question here is, why did all of this corn survive when it was facing such adverse conditions? Well, besides the fact that we're just tremendous farmers, we got extremely lucky out here. I mentioned a few times when we were scouting all these ponds that it was overcast, so not very much sun, and relatively cool, 60 to 70 degrees. I think that was our saving grace, the miracle that kept all of this corn alive. Had it been sunny and 85 or 90 degrees, this corn cooked in a day. However, that wasn't the case. Mother Nature must have felt that she owed us one after dumping 4 to 5 inches of rain on these farms, so she gave us pretty poor growing weather. And when you have a lot of water on the farm, that's exactly what you need for your crops to survive. That raises another question though. Why did all of this corn survive, yet those soybeans died? The answer is actually pretty straightforward. Corn is a taller plant, it grows faster, so it is a higher level above the water versus the soybeans. By no means though does that mean corn is bulletproof from rain. It can just last a little bit longer. At the time of the rain, the soybeans were probably 2 to 2.5 inches, whereas the corn was 5 to 6 inches tall. Having that added plant tissue above the water level once it got down helps prolong the life of the plant. The best way for me to explain this is that if I held 2 people underwater, one of them was holding their breath and one of them had a tiny straw, both of them would probably tap out eventually, but the person holding their breath would definitely go first. The person with the straw would probably have the same end result. It would take a little bit longer for them to get there though. That's pretty much what I chalk the difference between corn and soybean survivability up to. As both crops get taller, they can take a larger amount of rain. Neither of them though like to have wet feet for too long. When those roots are without oxygen for a very long time, it starts to take a toll on the plants. Usually that will display itself as nutrient deficiencies. The roots, whose primary job is to capture and transfer nutrients, start to rot, And then the above ground plant material shows all sorts of different deficiencies because they lack the necessary nutrients to build and repair cellular tissue. All I really have to say is that sometimes you're the hammer, sometimes you're the nail, and occasionally you're both. And in this instance, I think we were both. We took a lot of damage in the short term in a lot of our fields. In the long term though, I think we'll be just all right. The same applies to our corn and soybeans that were damaged with hail. They looked pretty ugly at the beginning, and they're starting to come around and look like a very productive farm. We're not gonna check on them today. We're pretty much running out of sunlight. I think that's enough farming for one video. Thank you all for tuning in. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and comment down below if you have any questions. You know I love to talk about farming. Have a great day, everyone. Peace.